Hello and a very good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to our friends from the UK dialing in. A warm welcome to our webinar today. The time is now, Race to Zero, jointly organized by the British High Commission Kuala Lumpur in collaboration with the British Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, BMCC. I'm Jennifer from the BMCC. We are delighted today to have a stellar panel of speakers comprising subject matter experts, advocates, and business leaders from progressive organizations sharing their own journey, stories of climate action advancement, as well as discussing ways to move to a zero carbon future that creates good job, builds resilience, protects public interest, and builds a better future for all of us. So on behalf of the BMCC and the British High Commission Kuala Lumpur, I would like to thank all our esteemed speakers today. This year, in November, the UK government will be hosting the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, in partnership with Italy. The please collaborate with High Commission Kuala Lumpur. Can I continue? Yeah. Just continue. Sorry about that. The BMCC is pleased to collaborate with the British High Commission Kuala Lumpur on a series of engagement activities with businesses in advance of COP26. I'm pleased to share today's webinar is the third installment of the BMCC Sustainable Net Future. Today's webinar is intended to engage businesses on a Road to Zero campaign to rally leadership and support in Malaysia. So that together we want to show that this is a race that we can win with Malaysian-based companies showing leadership in a space along with global peers. We are delighted with the interest shown for this agenda, evident by the number of participants who have registered for this webinar. We would also like to take this opportunity to thank all our supporting partners that have assisted us to promote this webinar to enable us to attract such a high commendable audience this afternoon. So with that, but before we start with our speaking sessions, let me just share with you, please do note that we are using Slido to take questions for our panel sessions. Hence, we will not be using the Q&A feature function or the public chat function that you see on your screens. To access Slido, please scan the QR code you see on the screen, and with your mobile devices, you should be able to access Slido. Okay, secondly, you have already seen our poll question. We will be running a couple of poll questions today. So great if all of you can participate. So on that note, could you please participate in this first poll question? Let us go to the poll question. Yes. So moving on, let's go to the next agenda. Okay. So moving on, we'll be moving to our first speaker. We are honored today to have with us the British High Commissioner to Malaysia, His Excellency Charles A., to give a special address on calling for Malaysian businesses to embrace strong climate actions. So without further ado, I would like to invite His Excellency Charles to give his address.
Friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure to be here today speaking to businesses based in Malaysia through this event jointly organised by the British Malaysia Chamber of Commerce and the British High Commission with the help and assistance of various other partner organisations. We're discussing a critical issue today, climate change. All of us know that if we do not act decisively and quickly, climate change will cause irreversible and catastrophic consequences for us all. As temperatures continue to rise, we're going to see droughts, heat waves, and more extreme weather events. This will devastate countries and have a crushing effect on our economies. The UK will play a key leadership role this year, hosting the UN Climate Change Conference COP26 in Glasgow in November, working in partnership with Italy. COP26 needs to be the moment where the world unites behind a fairer, greener recovery from the effects of COVID-19, a recovery which delivers both for our people and for our planet. In recent years, we've shown that green growth is absolutely possible. In the UK, for example, since 1990, we've grown our economy by 75% while cutting greenhouse gas emissions by 43%. The UK submitted an ambitious nationally determined contribution, or NDC, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 68% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. My government has set out a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution that will mobilise £12 billion of government investment to support up to 250,000 highly skilled jobs in the green economy in the UK, and will spur up to 3 times as much private sector investment. We've also announced that the British government will no longer provide any new financial or promotional support for the fossil fuel industry overseas. By doing so, we're committed to build entirely new industries. So, for example, just 20 years ago, the UK had just 2 offshore wind turbines powering only 2,000 homes. Now the UK has more offshore wind capacity than any other country on Earth. Renewables are already cheaper than coal power in 2/3 of all countries in the world. Globally, over the last 10 years, the cost of wind power has halved, and that of solar power has reduced by some 85%. Clean energy is one of the 5 key priority areas for COP26. The others are clean transport, nature-based solutions, adaptation and resilience, and, bringing together and underpinning it all, finance, an ambitious agenda which needs resolute action. That's why the UK, in partnership with Chile and the United Nations, is leading the Climate Ambition Alliance. And today's topic, the Race to Zero campaign, launched last June, is part of this alliance. This campaign mobilises a coalition of leading net zero initiatives, representing some 500 cities, over 500 universities, 23 regions, 1,700 businesses, and 85 of the biggest investors on Earth. All these actors from the so-called real economy will join 120 countries in the largest ever alliance committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050 at the latest. This alliance already represents over half of global GDP and covers nearly 1/4 of CO2 emissions. Malaysian cities and companies don't want to be left behind, so I'm pleased to announce that the KL City Council, Sarawak Energy Berhad, whose Chief Sustainability Lead will be speaking in this event later on, and another 4 Malaysian companies have already signed up to the Race to Zero campaign. Others are taking action too. Petronas, for example, has pledged a 2050 net zero aspiration, and conglomerates like the Sunway Group are increasingly assimilating sustainability in their businesses and supply chains. And we'll hear from them shortly. Now, a race to zero sounds exciting, but what does it actually mean in practice? Put simply, net zero, or carbon neutrality, means we are not adding new emissions to the atmosphere. Emissions will continue, but they will be balanced by absorbing an equivalent amount from the atmosphere. The good news is that technology exists to reach net zero, and it is increasingly affordable. A key element is powering economies with clean energy, replacing highly polluting coal and gas and oil-fired power stations with renewable energy sources such as wind or solar energy. Electric vehicles are rapidly becoming cheaper and more efficient, and many countries, including those committed to net zero, have announced plans and targets to phase out the sale of fossil fuel-powered cars. A switch to electric transport, powered by renewable energy, would play a huge role in lowering emissions, with the added bonus of slashing air pollution in the world's major cities. Reducing emissions is extremely important, but to get to net zero, we also need to find ways to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And here again, solutions are at hand, and the most important have existed in nature for thousands of years. These so-called nature-based solutions include forests, wetlands like peat swamps, mangroves, and even marine habitats like seagrass beds and coral reefs. They're all highly efficient at absorbing carbon. This is why huge efforts are being made around the world to save forests, to plant trees, and to rehabilitate and restore peat and mangrove areas, as well as to improve farming techniques, including within the large-scale crop-based commodity development and production. Again, businesses in this space need to play their part. During the COVID pandemic and the MCOs, I've enjoyed playing board games with my family. Our favourite new one is a game called Pandemic. It was actually devised before COVID came, but it's unlike any other game I know because the players need to cooperate and work together to defeat a pandemic. Either all win together or all lose together. The race to zero is just like this, seems to me. It's not like a normal race with some winners and some losers. We all have a part to play and we all win or lose together. But this is not a race we can afford to lose. Governments, of course, have a key role. The UK was the first country to legislate for net zero by 2050. The EU, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, along with more than 110 other countries, have pledged carbon neutrality by 2050. China says it will do so before 2060, and it will be wonderful to see Malaysia joining this list. Now, some will say that the largest industrialized and richest economies have got a greater responsibility in this area. I agree. Major emitters like the G20 countries, which generate 80% of all carbon emissions, they need to significantly increase their present levels of ambition and action. And developed countries must deliver on their commitment to provide $100 billion a year for climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience in developing countries. And those are funds from both public and private sectors. To this effect, the UK has committed to deliver £11.6 billion, that's around 66 billion ringgit, of international climate finance over the next 5 years. And I'm really pleased to say that Malaysia will be one of the recipient countries of this financing. So governments set the frameworks, and within that, the private sector needs to act. Some of the world's biggest and smallest companies are taking action, and I look forward to hearing from participants today. And I'm pleased that the UN Global Compact is helping Malaysian businesses to align with the UN's environmental and societal goals on both science-based target and race to zero. We'll hear in a moment from the Executive Director of UNGC Malaysia office, Farouz Nadar. We all have a part to play as individuals too, in terms of changing our habits and living in a way which is more sustainable and does less harm to the planet. So making the kind of lifestyle changes we need to reduce carbon. Whether we live in the south, the north, the east or the west, we share one life-giving but fragile planet. And as we recover from the coronavirus pandemic, the world has an opportunity not just to rebuild what went before, but to build back better. We need to take this action together. So I urge everyone involved in today's event to join the race to zero and commit your businesses to reaching net zero by 2050 at the latest. I'm very keen to do more with you over the coming months, and I look forward to hearing your pledges, your ideas, and your contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your insights and messages. Thank you for joining us so much. We really appreciate your participation. Before we invite our next speaker, we will run another quick poll question. Can we have the poll question, please? Thank you for everyone who's participated in the polling just now. So, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is an experienced corporate sustainability practitioner, having led projects that have been featured at the national level and Fortune 500 sustainability documents, Fortune 500 company documents. He provides advisory and insight to various private sector, government, UN agencies, and corporate sustainability matters on SDG and corporate sustainability matters. So may I now invite Faroz Nadar, the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact Network Malaysia and Brunei, to give his address on Race to Zero, where we are today in Malaysia, and the pivotal role of businesses. Faroz, over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Assalamualaikum, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. First of all, many thanks to the organizers for inviting me to be here today. And also very happy to say that the UNGC is a strong partner for the Race to Zero campaign globally as well. So I'm honored and delighted to be able to share my thoughts on this topic, the Race to Zero, where are we today in Malaysia, and especially the pivotal role businesses must play in achieving this. You know, I like this diagram very much. I think it kind of gives a description of how climate is going to hit us. If you look at the effect of COVID, right? COVID was unexpected. It came just like that, and it hit us hard. It affected our economies and it affected our businesses, and very much is a social risk. And looking at the previous poll, many respondents strongly felt that the COVID has given a better feeling, an emotional feel that climate is going to impact us even more, and especially from an environmental perspective. But more and more so is that just before COVID, perhaps in our mind we feel like climate is something that's going to happen to future generations, our kids, our grandchildren's. But we are going to see this impact in our lifetime. The Paris Accord, the IPCC reports, all have highlighted that the window for us to stop global warming is becoming shorter and shorter. And if we are unable to race to zero and meet the 1.5 degree pathways, any this increase in temperature will result in exponential impact to our world and to our businesses. And this means that we are also a unique generation, that we have the opportunity to stop this and ensure that our future generations inherit a much better place. So really, the time for action is now, with us as business leaders, as as corporate, as SME owners, for us to stop this and ensure that we are on the right path moving forward. Next slide, please. So where are we here in Malaysia? So UNGC Malaysia did a desktop research looking at how the top largest PLCs in Malaysia is looking at climate issues. So looking at this top 100 PLCs, we found that 77 has mentioned some kind of linkages towards climate change and impact to their business. 74% have various climate-related strategies in place. 73% said they have engaged in actions that contribute towards a climate agenda. However, most importantly, only about 40% have set targets towards their climate actions. And now this is the disconnect that we must close. While we all have starting to realize that it's important for us to take actions about climate, it must come hand in hand with ambitious targets for us to be able to reach race to zero and ensure that we are able to meet the 1.5 degree pathway. Next slide, please. But that being said, there are a number of Malaysian champions who have taken concrete and strong actions towards the race to zero. I'd like to share a few examples. First of all, Petronas has been the first Malaysian and the first Asia oil major to commit towards net zero. Then we have a series of companies who have committed towards the science-based targets. A company that we are very proud of to be a member, Sarawak Energy, is the first Malaysian GLCs to commit towards the science-based target. But again, this is not just the domain of large corporates. We've also got a Malaysian SME, Taiwa, who's also committed and also has verified the targets towards science-based target in achieving 1.5 degrees. Then recently there is a program called the SME Climate Hub that was launched, and we have two Malaysian SMEs who have committed towards halving their emissions, which is KSI and also OSEL Group. However, there are also a number of Malaysian companies that are taking independent company level action. So for example, Sunway is very strong in the TCFD approach. You've got banks like CIMB who've said that they will phase out coal in a time horizon. And then you've also got another example of a good Malaysian SME based in Johor, Heng Hiap, who is the world's first company certified that is stopping plastics going into the oceans by recycling them into end products. All these contribute towards strong 1.5-degree pathways from the Malaysian context. But all these collective actions will lead towards, how private sector in Malaysia contributes to Malaysia's NDC, nationally determined contributions towards all of us collectively crossing this 1.5-degree agenda together. Next, please. But what is important as well, as we set our targets now, I would also urge all of you to consider looking at science-based targets initiatives. Now, why I say this is because this is a very matured program in which it provides various pathways dependent on the sector or industry you are in to calculate what would be the emission reductions that's required for you to hit a 1.5-degree pathway. And more importantly, after committing, it puts in place a mechanism for you to report and ensure your progress for these goals. So all this is important because, can I have the next please? So all of this is important because this is Malaysia's business opportunity for us to position our country as a sustainable trading hub. As mentioned by His Excellency, there are a number of global economies that have committed themselves towards achieving a net zero future. EU has set it, China has set it, our neighbors down south, Singapore has set it, and we have seen announcement made by our government of saying that no, the 12 Malaysia plan will also focus on low carbon economy. All this means that trade will also start to pivot towards looking at trading partners who take into consideration ESG factors, and climate is going to be the core. So moving forward, if you want to be a competitive business, price and quality will not be enough anymore. Your sustainability and your climate actions will also be taken into consideration. So when Malaysian private sector band it together, collectively push this together, we are also positioning our country as a sustainable trading hub. And if you purchase from Malaysian companies, you reduce your risk for ESG issues, and therefore make us a very attractive player in global supply chains. And importantly, next please. This decade is also demarcated as a decade of action by the UN. It means that we have had enough time for us to talk about wanting to do something. Now it's a time for us to take these actions and ensure that we achieve this race to zero together. Next slide, please. But it's also important for us to understand that we must build in the business taxonomy and narratives towards the race to zero. Just saying that we need to save the world and things like that is great, but we must understand that the business is built to profit. Now, profit is not a bad word. What is important is how we profit. So first is that decarbonization is not degrowth. Growth is an agenda for business, but most importantly, we must put the mindset of how the race to zero and taking into consideration climate advantage is going to compound our growth. And there are many instances of how this can happen. Future consumers in globally and also in Malaysia, if you can look at a research done by Pew, have indicated that they are going to be climate conscious consumers. That means they're going to buy from companies that are taking actions or are demonstrating leadership in this space. So all this advantage must be thought out in your drive towards achieving this race to zero. Next, please. But also, sometimes when we talk about race to zero, we talk about net zero emissions. It can be quite a complex and even at times scary things. But we must bear in mind that for businesses, for us to achieve race to zero, I believe there's two major considerations. First, we must look at our climate productivity and go back to the productivity formula, which is output and input. We must look at what is our footprint output and what is our footprint input and strive towards achieving a net zero balance with this. However, productivity and output alone is not enough. This must be driven by the efficiency in our operations. A lot of times when we talk about race towards achieving a climate agenda, we are fixated towards doing this big, sometimes very expensive investment and jumps. But this may not be the case. I think it's important for us to understand that there are many cumulative efficiency steps that we can take before we need to consider expensive investments or big ticket innovations to look at. And more importantly is that we need to start coupling everyday business processes to also look at climate impact and narratives. So for example, if you're doing agile, if you're doing quality management, if you're doing what do you call this, digitalization, all this is process efficiency that can also be measured towards your impact towards climate agenda. So race to zero need not be complex, it may not necessarily be expensive, but it must be cumulative effects that collectively will push the climate needle for businesses. Next, please. So here I'm just going to offer some starting steps of how the private sector can go towards their race to zero agenda. Now, this is taken from the Business 1.5 degree playbook, and I recommend each of you here to have a look at this. It's available on the SME Climate Hub. Now, these are pillars, not necessarily a step-by-step approach. When we talk about our climate agenda and how we want to achieve race to zero, we need to consider reducing first our own emissions. The next consideration is reducing your value chain emissions. So it's not good enough for us to talk only about us. In many business instances, a lot of this carbon emission actually comes from your supply and supply chains. So we also must understand how we can collectively push our suppliers to also reach towards our common target. Third is that integrated to business strategy. As I mentioned before, there are many ways to skin this cat, but most importantly, when this agenda is put towards leadership decisions, how is this going to value add the organizations? And the fourthly, businesses also need to play their role in influencing climate action in society. This can be done by plugging in your consumer behavior towards concepts such as circular economy and things like that. How can you incentivize your consumers to also take these positive actions? So again, it's not complex. If you put the right framework, race to zero is very achievable for the private sector. So next. So I'm just going to end my presentation, by sharing my favorite poem, which I think is quite in line with this race to zero, which sometimes can feel very complex and scary. So the poem goes like this. There is a freedom waiting for you in the breezes of the sky, and you ask, what if you fall? But oh my darling, what if you fly? So with that, I urge all of you here, please, let's collectively get on this journey together, because together we can cross this global line and complete this race to zero race. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Feroz. Some very good insights, information, data, and especially some key messages for companies to join the race. A key takeaway that we should remember is climate action need not be complex. I think that is something that we should keep in mind, and it need not be complex. Feroz has given some advice on the 1, 2, 3 go. Remember the 4 pillars on how to get started. I'm sure Feroz and his team and USCG will be welcoming any questions, to be contacted to assist anyone who's interested to join the journey. So thank you again, Feroz. We will just move on to the next speaker. Before that, there's another poll of coming up. Please do give your answers via Slido. Okay, let's move on to our next session. It's on Race to Zero Meeting Climate Leadership. I'm proud to introduce Ms. Angelia Chin Sharp, who will moderate our next session. But before that, let me just give a brief introduction to Angelia. Angelia is currently the Chief Executive Officer and Country Head Malaysia of BNB Paribas Asset Management, and a strong proponent, I know myself, of ESG and the climate change agenda. I must also take this opportunity to mention that Angela was recently awarded the CEO of the Year by Asia Asset Management 2021 Best of the Best Awards. Congratulations, Angelia, on this well-deserved recognition. Definitely another feather to your cap. So with that, may I now pass the session to Angelia to introduce our two esteemed speakers, Mr. Zafri Sham from Petronas and Professor Wu from Sunway. Angelia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I'm really, really happy to be part of this panel session, moderating this panel session. And I'm really excited that we're having this discussion because I think it's without doubt from even His Excellency, Mr. Hayes' message as well as Mr. Nada's message that we cannot wait anymore. Even though 2050 sounds like it's really far away, but the reality is that if we do not act now, I think the consequences will be more dire, and that's without doubt. So I think it's good to hear from Mr. Nada, also the recognition of the leadership from the Malaysian companies in taking the lead to achieving net zero by 2015. So I'm very privileged this afternoon to introduce to you two very distinguished gentlemen. The first is Professor Wu. Professor Wu is a distinguished professor of economics at the University of from the University of California in Davis, and a research professor at the Sunway University in Kuala Lumpur, where he heads the Jeffrey Chia Institute of Southeast Asia and Jeffrey Sachs Center on Sustainable Development. He also holds academic appointments at Fudan University at Shanghai, Penang Institute in Georgetown, and the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing. He is an expert on the East Asian economies, particularly China, Indonesia, and Malaysia. His current research focuses on designing efficient, equitable pathways to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals with projects on green finance, middle income trap, and global economic architecture for the multipolar world. Professor Wu will later share with us some studies that he did on the ASEAN and their race to zero. It will be quite an interesting presentation. So before I invite Professor Wu to present, let me also introduce Encik Zafri Sham Ahmad. And we have heard before that Petronas is committed to achieving net zero by 2050. So we are very privileged to have Encik Zafri to share with us Petronas' journey. Encik Zafri was appointed as Vice President for Petronas Group Health, Safety, Security and Environment of Petronas since 2016. He brings with him more than 25 years of experience in project implementation and plant operations, as well as experience in joint venture company. Thanks to his leadership, he has enabled the group to achieve sustainable HSSE, which is health, safety, security, environment, excellence, by focusing on leadership, culture, and capability, resulting in positive HSSE trends for the organization. He had also led GHSSE in adopting ahead of the curve strategies such as digital technology, process simplification, and data analytics. Encik Zafri was also instrumental in advancing Petronas' sustainable development journey by strengthening organization resources to better orchestrate group-wide SD Sustainable Development Initiative. He played a key role in shaping and steering Petronas' announcement of net zero carbon emission 2015 aspiration, which was made in October 2020. I also want to congratulate Petronas being one of the first oil and gas company to commit to the net zero journey in Asia. So maybe I'll invite Professor Wu first to present his presentation.
Oh, good afternoon, good day. I'm very pleased to have this chance to report to you some of the work that Sunway is doing to promote decarbonization of our society. At the company level, Sunway Construction and Sunway Real Estate promotes green urbanization possibly the most well-known example being the rehabilitation of an abandoned waste mine into what that is Sunway City today. A place devoid of any flora is now a place that is characterized by trees everywhere. At the community level, Sunway, a good example what we do at the community level is to discourage the use of cars. We have a network of walkways, that covered walkway throughout Sunway City, so people could move from one place to another without having the use of a car. And we have got a free bus that takes people around. And furthermore, we have a bus rapid transit that connects to the commuter train system and the LRT. That is the community level. At the country level, we promote policies that makes sense, right? That does not make sense at the individual company level. The most carbon intensive activity of Sunway Corporation is in the energy we buy from TNB, because most of TNB's energy is generated by oil or by gas. It makes no sense for Sunway to turn itself into a solar farm in order not to stop buying energy from Tenaga. The right thing to do for Sunway is to argue for the defossilization of the national energy supply. This is something that Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia does in his membership of the National Economic Council. So at the national level, we also want to push, we also suggest ways in which Malaysia could advise the other ASEAN countries on how to decarbonize their economies. So we work at the company level, the community level, the national level. Sunway also works actively on the global level. Specifically, Sunway is a member of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which is a network of 1,400 research organizations in the world committed to disseminating knowledge on sustainable development practices. Sunway supports the work of this, like for example, one of its projects is Mission 4.7, which is public outreach and education from primary to university level on how to achieve knowledge of sustainable practices. Pan Ki-moon and Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia are the chairman of this global initiative, which was launched about a month ago by the Pope. So we work not only on the company level, the community level, the national level, and the global level. All of this work is done because we are guided by our understanding of how the world works and by our commitment to sustainable development. The best way for me to give you an idea of the range of activities that Sunway engage in to decarbonize the societies is to talk about our understanding of the world, which drives our participation, our actions on the different level. Basically, could we have the next slide, please? The next slide, please. The next slide again, please. Thank you. The race to zero, to carbon neutrality, really began in September 2019 when the European Union launched the European Green Deal. And China upped the game last year in October, 1 year after the European Green Deal, by announcing that it would achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. That set off a race by Japan, who within 3 weeks later announced that Japan would go carbon neutral by 2015, and that the Koreans, not to be left behind, announced within a week that they too will achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Up until yesterday, because today is over yet, so I don't know what announcements and surprises our Prime Minister might make, but up until yesterday, no ASEAN country has announced a plan to achieve net zero emissions. They announced it as a goal, but they have not announced a plan with quantitative targets and a date of when to achieve it. In fact, none of the ASEAN countries who have all signed up to the 2015 Paris Climate Treaty, no one has made any move to go above doing what they say they would do in their obligations. Unlike what the Europeans have done, the Chinese, the Japanese, and most recently with the return of, with the kicking out of Trump, a return to green policy by the United States. Biden on his first day committed to carbon neutrality by 2050. So everybody has scaled up, but somehow we in ASEAN has been slower. So this is what we at Sunway would like the ASEAN to make progress on this front. Because I think we are now in the awkward situation that we might have nothing to say in the global climate summit in April 2021 that Biden is going to convene. And we might well have nothing to say at COP26 in Glasgow in November 2021. So, can we have the next slide, please? The thing is, we have to understand what makes ASEAN a reluctant climate warrior. This is where Sunway has to have a role in promoting to overcome this reluctance. You just look at who are the ministries in the different countries that are taking responsibility for the Sustainable Development Goals and of the Paris Climate Treaty. In the case of Malaysia, I'm very proud to point out the EPU is the lead agency. The EPU has systematically inserted SDGs into the Malaysian development plans. This is something we can be very proud of. But who do you think is the lead agency for SDGs and Paris Climate Treaty in Thailand? It is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, not the Ministry of Economic Planning, not the Finance Ministry. And in Laos, it is also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So basically, the reason we do anything on climate is because of outside pressure. And so the Foreign Ministry is the de facto agency in charge of that. So we could see varying degrees of enthusiasm for decarbonization within ASEAN. And I think Malaysia should set an example. And Sunway has come up with a proposal of what Malaysia can do to encourage the rest of ASEAN to do so. I'll tell you more about the Sunway proposal in a little bit. And we asked the question, is Malaysia itself ambitious enough in our climate treaty? We committed to a 35% decrease in the intensity of our carbon emission. Well, the quantitative target is, if you look at the ratio of tons of CO2 over GDP, we promised that it would drop by 35% by 2050. So, is that a big promise by us? Well, can we have the next slide? What we see is, 2050 is roughly 30 years from now. So let's look at what we had done in some preceding 30 years, 1985 to 2015. In that period, Malaysian intensity, CO2 intensity, actually dropped by 37%. In fact, what we promised to do for the next 30 years is what we all achieved in the previous 30 years. But the important thing to note is that even though our intensity in the last 30 years dropped by 37%, the total amount of CO2 emitted by Malaysia went up by 469%. So in short, we may have committed to reducing our carbon emission intensity by 35% by 2050, but we will be emitting at least 3 times more CO2 30 years from now than today. This is, we are not heading towards carbon neutrality. That's for sure. So can I have the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Next slide again. Here is a breakdown on where CO2 emission comes from. The biggest source is our generation of power. Generation of power for the cars, you burn petrol. And generation of power for electricity. And we see it is 251,000 gigatons. So that is a very big number. Nothing else matches it. But what is important to note is that the existence of our huge forest leads to us being a carbon sink of negative emission of 241,000 gigatons of CO2. So it is true that our energy generation generates CO2, but the existence of forest cover redeems us to a remarkable extent. So it means that any strategy that we do in Malaysia has to do not only be to decarbonize energy, but decarbonize the energy generation system, but also to preserve and expand our forest land. Let's move
Sorry,
on to the
Professor,
next.
we have another 3 more minutes for your session. So,
I know. So can I move to the next slide? Okay. What are the difficulties that are standing in the way of achieving a net zero emission? One of them is the reason why ASEAN is reluctant is embracing for net zero is because they see a trade-off between economic development and CO2 control. The truth is, it is not the case at all. In fact, I'm going to, if time permits, I'm going to show you that going green will not only bring new sources of economic dynamism to Malaysia, it will also help stabilize society. Because the chief victims of climate change, like flooding and the loss of biodiversity, are the most marginalized groups in Malaysia. So basically, one reason why we are not doing well is because we lack the technical capacity of how to design an economic strategy that is compatible with green development. The next reason is there's a lack of political incentive. Look at Malaysia or any ASEAN countries. There's no green party. So that is voter education is needed. And the second one is the international arena is not giving us much incentive to achieve green carbonization either. Next slide, please. So basically, I think that what we do know is, back, please. I'm now a man of my time. Thank you. We have to increase our technical capacity, and this is where advice from the advanced countries would be invaluable. And also, the thing is, foreign funding for large scale mass level public education is very important. And furthermore, given the fact that our forests are carbon sinks, the rest of the world should be funding the preservation and expansion of our tropical forests. Next slide, please. In the final rundown to the minute, we will see that the Cold War might undermine the decarbonization effort because we will be too focused on participating in taking sides, and the chief two antagonists, the United States and China, would want us to focus on fighting each other rather than on decarbonization. That is scenario A. Actually, there's another scenario. Largely because while there is a Cold War on, the only way to prevent the Cold War from becoming a hot war is that the United China are fully agree, have the full understanding that while they may compete in economic geostrategic sphere, there must be enough areas of cooperation such that a hot war is prevented. And where would that area of cooperation be? It would be in pandemic and climate change control. So what will happen in the world is both the United States and China will in the future be telling ASEAN that ASEAN better decarbonize their economies or else they will face restrictions on their trade with China and the United States. And the Europeans would not be far behind in demanding such actions of us. So basically, not only is it good for us, which we should be doing anyway, but the fact is the future is one in which you will be forced to undertake this decarbonization. With this realization, the next slide, please. Sunway University, or Sunway, next slide, please. What we have done is we are pushing forward an ASEAN Green Deal that we hope the Malaysian government would push on to the rest of the ASEAN community. And this is an effort that I would invite everybody to join us here at Sunway University. We welcome your participation and your ideas. And next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. That's my email address. And that's all the time I have for. And thank you, Angelia, for your kind patience.
Thank you, Professor Wu, for your very passionate presentation. We'll come back to some questions for you later, but before that, I think moving down is that coming closer to home. I think I would like to invite Zafri, the Petronas journey towards net zero. Zafri?
Angelia, it's good. It is good to see the passion that Professor Wu demonstrated when he talked about this subject. But
Yes.
anyway, it is indeed an honor for me to be here today before such a distinguished audience, albeit virtually. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the organizer for inviting Petronas to share our commitment towards achieving net zero carbon emissions. What I plan to do is to talk about the drive for us in coming up with this, in embracing, adopting this aspiration, how we plan to achieve that at a very high level, as well as what it needs, what it really needs for us to be able to successfully achieve that aspiration. Well, a bit on a background, sustainable development has become a necessity for societies all across the globe now, balancing the competing priorities between economics, financial pursuits with ESG performance in creating sustainable solutions for their communities. Back in 2015, when the Paris Agreement set a global target of net zero emissions, over 100 or close to 200 countries joined hands in climate leadership. A year later, Malaysia signed and ratified the Paris Agreement as part of its commitment to combat climate change. As a nation, we are committed to achieve a 45% improvement in Malaysia's greenhouse gas emissions intensity per unit GDP by 2030 relative to the 2005 levels. And as a government-linked company, Petronas has always aligned our efforts to both the nation's commitment to climate change and also the global energy transition to a low-carbon economy. Our sustainable development or SD journey actually goes back as far back as 2001, early 2000s, when Petronas corporate sustainability framework was conceptualized. In 2012, we launched the Petronas Carbon Commitment aligned with the Kyoto Protocol and UN FCCC. This was followed by the introduction progressively of Petronas Human Rights Commitment back in 2015 also. On the social front, Petronas is also synonymous with various CSR activities and human capital development efforts that benefit communities wherever we operate. For example, since 1975, we have invested over 3 billion ringgit on human capital development through our education sponsorship program at the various learning institutions across the globe. We are also, and many may not know that we are also proud to play a role in the conservation of the Imbak Canyon, a virgin jungle in Sabah, which includes the implementation of awareness, community enhancement program included. These, among others, are just some of the efforts in sustainable development that we have done thus far. Inspired by our statement of purpose that was launched, published in 2019 as, a progressive energy and solution partner enriching lives for a sustainable future. We were driven to make an even stronger commitment towards climate change. As such, back in October last year, in 2020, the organization declared our net zero carbon emissions by 2050 aspiration, making Petronas the first Southeast Asian oil company and amongst the earliest in the whole of Asia Pacific region to make such a bold move. This aspiration strengthens our corporate responsibility further to produce affordable and reliable energy that brings positive impact to the people while balancing it with a greater climate actions. It is also an essential step to future-proof the organization, aligned with our three-pronged strategy, particularly in stepping out, which supports the diversification of Petronas business to lower carbon business, including renewable energy. In all honesty, I must say that this journey towards net zero carbon emission will present a defining challenge for us. Though the oil and gas industry have always been vilified for its role in polluting the environment, we believe that we are also actually in a very good position to be part of the solution. So regardless of the challenges that we will face along this 30-year journey, we believe that this commitment is the right thing to do, not just for us, but for humanity overall. Well, the principle of measure, reduce, and offset is used. There will be 4 building blocks that we will be leveraging on to achieve the net zero aspiration. The first is the operational excellence. Second would be low carbon energy and solutions. The third block would be technology and innovation. And of course, the fourth block is carbon offset. We will continue to reduce emissions in our operations through our strong base of operational excellence. That is the low-hanging fruits that we can work on. This allows us to gradually reduce emissions as planned, while increasing energy efficiencies through reduction and elimination of flaring, venting, fuel gas, and striving to achieve the best plant operating efficiency from all of our assets. For the record, Petronas initiatives such as the reduction of flaring and venting and various other GHG emission abatement projects have, since 2012, resulted in a reduction of our 12.8 million ton of CO2 equivalent of GHG emissions. And we have done that even before our announcement of the climate change, of the net zero carbon emission. Our downstream and gas and new energy businesses have reached an overall equipment effectiveness. It's a measure of plant efficiency rate of over 90% continuously, indicating very high efficiency of operations. Further, our upstream business has been complying to the zero continuous flaring and venting requirements aligned to the Petronas carbon commitment for all new projects in striving to reach world-class GHG intensities for their existing operations. However, we know that all this is not enough to achieve net zero. As such, we have lined up low carbon energy and solutions to further reduce our GHG emissions and move towards energy transition in supplying clean and more low carbon energy to our customers. For example, Petronas has installed over 600 megawatt of renewable energy, a six-fold increase compared to 2018, the year before, prior to our M Plus acquisition. At the same time, we are collaborating with our partners to venture into hydrogen market. And in 2020, we signed a memorandum of understanding with Sarawak Energy. In the downstream business, for example, we have been looking at new plastic economy through a number of venture capital projects within Petronas Chemicals Group to recycle plastics into energy or feedstock. Our R&D team is also exploring ways on how to turn waste into hydrogen, as well as biofuels. I mentioned the third block that will support us in this aspiration is leveraging on technology. Technology is an important component in our journey, and we will continue to adopt it in our strategy, including the carbon capture and storage, or CCUS, energy storage, and greater electrification in our operations through renewable energy. For example, we are embarking on our first offshore carbon capture and storage project that is aimed for deployment by 2025, while maturing technologies for onshore processing plants to utilize the captured CO2 and convert it into petrochemical products. This manner of looping back waste CO2 into the system also demonstrates our intent to promote greater circularity in our operations. We also look at electrify some of our operations with renewables through the installation of solar panels on our infrastructure. For example, this year we have plans to pilot an offshore floating wind turbines to power up one of our upstream offshore platforms. We believe that by applying low carbon technologies and innovative solutions consistently, Petronas will be able to meet its future target of net zero. Life cycle thinking has also been adopted to praise our environment footprint across the value chain and create new and inclusive opportunities to contribute towards a just transition wherever we operate. Currently, we are also aligning our sustainability metrics to international framework and standards like the WEF, the TCFD, GRI, and sustainability accounting standards to progressively measure our performance based on our roadmap. This is key to ensure that all our initiatives and efforts are fully aligned to global best practices. In general, overall, this holistic approach using these four blocks will be steered by our four sustainability lenses: value creation, safeguard the environment, positive social impact, and responsible governance. Having said this, I would like to take this opportunity to stress that this is not something that we can do alone. The complexity of the businesses connected with sustainability warrants collaboration among business, policymakers, customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Encik Zafri. I think it's without doubt we have two very passionate panelists here. And professors of everybody to join the journey towards net zero, even coming out with ideas. I think the push is definitely there. I think even though we talk about the different probably speed for the ASEAN countries in coming together to achieve the net zero. But I believe the push is there. I think within the financial institutions, there are already new coal policy coming in place in terms of whether we can continue to finance or invest to companies depend on coal to fuel the economy. So I've also seen that even with the latest WWF report, that we are seeing countries from Vietnam, from Thailand, of course Malaysia as well, even our utility companies and like what oil and gas companies are addressing, areas to speed up the race to zero. So we've got. I know in the interest of time, we have probably 5 minutes to question. I would like to invite those who would like to ask question that they can also go to Slido to post their question. But maybe I would like to probably ask the question first to Intizafri. I know that oil and gas companies, they always say they want to move towards net zero, but we also hear that some environmentalists don't believe that this is what you are really doing. But we can see the passion that you have basically shared with us. So, what are your views? Do you think that this is truly what you move towards? Stop drilling, moving towards more renewable, investing into technology on the green hydrogen that you talk about. I know there's a lot of research on green hydrogen, which is going to be the next thing to fuel the economy. But again, a lot of research still needs to be done on green hydrogen. So maybe some thoughts from you about whether can Petronas truly meet the net zero by 2050?
Of course, of course. I always get these questions in meetings, conferences. Consisted of banks and others. For example, Petronas oil and gas companies are always seen as very bad people. They ask me to sit at the back. But anyway, don't worry. If we were to look at the annual energy outlook by the U.S. Energy Information Administration says that the global energy demand is expected to grow through 2050, with fossil fuel still dominating the global energy mix in 2050 at over more than 50%. This is driven by strong economic growth in countries that are not in the OECD, particularly Asia. The demand for energy is still there. And because of that, there is a need for us to balance between what we see as still providing energy security, energy affordability, but also sustainability. So it is what we call a trilemma that we need to balance. There is no black or white how to balance it. It depends on countries. It depends on organization. And as a responsible organization, Petronas is committed to provide cleaner energies to societies, and that is why we have announced this aspiration, because we want to be a responsible organization, and providing cleaner energies to society will includes ensuring our operations are conducted sustainably and responsibly. Of course, we rely on technology as part of our roadmap. Without that, it will be quite a challenge. And I would say that yes, we are serious. And for Petronas, what is key is that we are able to strike the optimal equilibrium, providing energy that is needed in a secure, affordable, and sustainable manner, while
Thank you.
contributing to the economic growth and a better quality of life. That is our target.
Thank you, Intizafri. I believe Petronas is in the right path, and we are happy to continue to monitor 2030 targets, and then we go to 2050. But before, maybe 11 seconds only for Professor Wu. We can see that the concerted effort of EU in achieving the targets for 2050, and we talk about, again, the disparity between the ASEAN countries. Do you think it would be worthwhile for ASEAN countries, the governments, to come together just like an EU bloc in terms of, working together to achieve the targets for ASEAN in terms of the net zero? Do you think that it's a better way that rather than individual governments doing it on their own?
Oh, there's no doubt. Like, for example, the supply of energy. For example, if it rains in Malaysia, you clearly cannot get solar energy at that point in time. But if you have a regional grid, so you can get green electricity from another ASEAN country. And furthermore, hydropower is an important source of green energy, and we need a regional grid for that. And furthermore, we can have if we have regional high-speed trains, then people will need to fly less. And because flying is one of the most carbon intensive activity you can you can have in traveling.
So we should bring
So,
back the Singapore fast
and
track.
not only is that cooperation results in more efficient decarbonization, it will also ensure the survival of ASEAN as a bloc in an age where the new Cold War is upon us, when we are all being pulled in two different directions. Cooperation on green development is what that will preserve ASEAN's political independence in this new Cold War age.
Thank you,
Yes.
Professor Wu. I'm sorry we have to wrap it up because there's another panel session after us. So I want to take this opportunity to thank Encik Zafri and Professor Wu for their passion. I look forward to working very closely with all of you. And I think importantly, why are we going to race to net zero? It's not about saving our planet because the planet doesn't need saving, because I think what needs saving is us. So the race to zero is saving the human beings, because if we all perish, the plants can continue to grow, the fishes can continue to breed. But what about the human beings? So that's my question to everybody. So thank you very much, and wish all of you the very
Thank you.
best on your journey to net zero.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angelia. Thank you, Angelia Zafri and Professor Fu, for the session. We really appreciate your insights and messages, which are valuable, especially for companies who are looking for examples to achieve similar goals to reduce carbon emissions. So we will now break for 1 minute for so please enjoy the video. We need to go on to the next sessions, but just hold on. We'll go for break for a minute. Please stay on. We'll come back soon and enjoy the video. Hi everyone, welcome back. Firstly, a slight delay in our program, so I hope you can stay with us. We will be slightly delayed in concluding the webinar for today. I do hope you can stay with us, because coming up next is a stellar panel of industry leaders sharing their views and thoughts on their journey, why combating climate change is a business priority to them. So we are proud for this session to have leaders of leading organizations that are already in the forefront in taking action against climate risks. So our speakers for today, we are very pleased to have Jason Snap from AstraZeneca, Global Head of Environment Protection, AstraZeneca, joining us all the way from the UK. Mr. Mohammad Irwan, the Head of Sustainability Division of Sarawak Energy Berhad, Andreas Pistauer, sorry Andreas if I pronounced your name, apologies, the Managing Director of Siemens Energy, Mr. Andrew Seal, the Managing Director and Country Head for Commercial Banking, HSBC Malaysia. Andrew is replacing Stuart Mill, who can't be with us due to unforeseen circumstances. But we are happy to have Andrew on board. Andrew is a board member. So Andrew, welcome back. And to moderate this session, we are delighted to have Dato' Muhammad Faiz, the Executive Chairman of PwC. One of his many roles as the Executive Chairman is to contribute to coordinate the firm's services in the sustainability and climate change field. So Dato' Faiz actually wears many other hats outside his role, and related to this climate change agenda, he is currently a steering committee member of the CEO Action Network. It's also a supporting organization for today. The network represents Malaysian industry players seeking to advocate policy matters, bring better awareness of climate change issues among businesses. So it is indeed great to have Dato' Faiz to moderate this session. So Dato' Faiz, over to you.
Great. So, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Jennifer has very kindly done the introductions of the individuals on the panel. Maybe as a quick of context. So we've heard from the ambassador talking about what the UK has done, and it's certainly very impressive in terms of their plans on electric vehicles, renewable energy, and also jobs. What we also heard from a very enthusiastic Mr. Farouz from the UN Global Compact is that words alone aren't sufficient. You need to be able to have targets and be able to measure them. And I think that's why this panel is probably quite interesting, because it'll be quite useful for, I think, people on the call to understand how four world-leading organizations, a financier, pharmaceutical company, an energy company, as well as a heavy industry company, how they have interpreted these targets into what they do. And picking up from Mr. Farouz's point, other than poetry, of course, is the fact that you obviously need to embed it in your strategy. So with us today, as I mentioned, the four gentlemen. We'll start with Andrew, and what we're going to do, given the time constraint, is that each gentleman has about 4 minutes, and I apologize for the lack of diversity, but you'll see that Andrew and I have decided to grow beards. We didn't encourage the other three to do so, and we will basically finish by 6. So it might truncate a little bit the Q&As, but I hope that some of the questions that you may have may already be incorporated into what they have to say. So without further ado, can I hand over to Andrew to share what HSBC has done in terms of their sustainability plans. Andrew?
Sporting beards as a result of COVID-19 and the MCO. Anyway, a very good evening to my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Global pandemics, climate change, natural disasters, poor soil conditions, deforestation. These are issues at the heart of sustainable development. And obviously to address some of these issues, the Paris Agreement signed by global leaders in 2015 set a goal to limit the rise in the planet's temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by 2050. And every organisation in the world has a part to play in that. As such, this year's anticipated COP26 in Glasgow is crucial, given how COVID-19 has refocused priorities and provided more emphasis on building back better through a green recovery. And the financial system will have significant focus on that in helping to deliver the Paris Agreement and accelerating the global transition to net zero. And that's why sustainability as a whole is a business priority for HSBC. And the most significant contribution we can make to tackling climate change is financing the transition to net zero. Finance is key to building a sustainable future. Our international reach and global client network means we can influence and shape fundamental change. Achieving net zero is a huge opportunity the world has to take. At HSBC, we recognise that how we do business is just as important as what we do. We have a responsibility to our customers, employees, and the communities in which we operate. And we understand that to achieve success in the long term, economic growth has to be sustainable. We're driving sustainability in 3 key areas: our group public commitments, leveraging on our strong global footprint to provide world-first and sustainable financing, and wider industry change, where HSBC participates in numerous groups and commitments driving change. For example, the Loan Markets Association, Green Loan Principles, and the Joint Committee on Climate Change, which is a joint initiative by the Central Bank, here Bank Negara, and the Securities Commission to drive climate change agenda in the financial industry. And that's why, in October last year, we took a huge step forward to announce a new climate ambition to provide between 750 billion and $1 trillion in financing and investment over the next 10 years for clients in all sectors to support them to progressively decarbonise. We will prioritise financing and investment that supports the transition to a net zero global economy. Additionally, we will also plan to achieve net zero emissions in our own operations and supply chain by 2030. And we're working with a number of stakeholders, including charities, community groups, our employees, financial institutions, governments, non-government institutions, and policymakers. But the most significant thing we are doing is supporting our customers' transition to lower carbon through transition financing. We intend to focus our dialogue with our customers to better understand the challenges they face and thereafter help them develop their credible transition plans. And we'll continue to deliver innovative solutions, including bespoke sustainability-linked financing structures with mechanisms based on clients' metrics and targets for ESG indicators. And we recognise the importance of working in partnership with our customers, which means we need to train our frontline managers to better engage with our customers and have the right sophisticated conversations around sustainability. Our new climate ambition also demonstrates our commitment to support and partner with Malaysian businesses that value and prioritise sustainability. We will accelerate our efforts to support customers on their journey while ensuring their ongoing resilience and prosperity. This will allow us to accelerate our efforts to deliver the group's first sustainable banking entity with our Islamic banking subsidiary HSBC Amanah, and more broadly support Malaysia's climate ambition by being a leading partner. We've been at the front of developing sustainable finance for a number of years now, and we've had a number of firsts in this field, from helping companies, governments and institutions issue green, social and sustainable bonds to attaching ambitious environmental targets to business loans. In fact, the UK government selected us in February 2021 to jointly structure its first ever sovereign green bond. In Malaysia, we've rolled out numerous market-leading sustainable solutions, including the world's first United Nations Sukuk, the first environmental, social and government, or ESG, Islamic structured product in the Malaysian market, and HSBC Group's first ASEAN Green Sustainable and Responsible Investment Sukuk for Leader Energy. We're also the first Islamic bank in Malaysia to link a charity feature with credit cards made from 85% recycled plastic. In 2017, the value-based intermediation initiative driven by Islamic banks in the country, together with Bank Negara in Malaysia, was set up. We've played a very important role in driving that forward and making sure that it's fully and properly adopted in the country. And in respect to that, HSBC Amanah rolled out the industry's first VBR-related product, Takaful Future Secure, a product for legacy planning. We've also very proud to have won recognition as an industry leader for these efforts, including being named the Investment Bank of the Year for Sustainability by The Banker and World's Best Bank for Sustainable Finance by Euromoney. The need to transition to a low-carbon economy is more urgent than ever. Now is a time for action, and I'm really looking forward to this lively panel discussion. Thank you.
So we've heard from the financier, so let's listen to someone who actually uses these finances. So Encik Irwan from Sarawak Energy, I gather just now we heard that you're actually one of the companies in Malaysia that have actually declared your own net zero target. Could you explain a little bit more about how Sarawak Energy looks at this whole issue?
Okay, thank you so much, Dato'. Yeah, thank you so much, Dato'. Thank you so much. So basically for Sarawak Energy, we are the largest energy developer and provider in Malaysia. This year, we celebrate 100 years of powering Sarawak. So we are wholly owned by Sarawak government, and we aim to achieve the government vision of sustainable growth and prosperity for Sarawak and the region by sharing our renewable energy resources and development expertise beyond our traditional markets. Uh, for your info, we export electricity to Indonesia, and we are looking forward to expanding our markets throughout Borneo and ASEAN power grid. Climate change is one of the biggest global issues, and it's also our issues as well. So it's a real issue facing by any business. So everyone basically can play our role in this. For Sarawak Energy, it is important for us because in any generation, technologies will be impacted by climate change. So understanding the climate change risks and opportunity are very crucial for us to really mitigate and adapt to climate change, as well as maintaining our business resilient. So for Sarawak Energy, in line with our commitment to harness clean and renewable sources of energy, we can see a major improvement has been achieved on the supply side of it, generation side, where our hydro generation, basically the biggest generation mix in our generation, it has increased from only 15% in 2011 to 78% in 2019. As a result of this, it decreased our main grid carbon emission intensity by 68% from 2011 to 2019. So basically, through our monitoring or our measurement, our grid emission intensity now is between below 2 degrees C and 1.5 degrees C. So there's a need to put in extra effort for us to achieve below 1.5 degrees C by 2030. Our focus also shifted to climate because most of it already been done heavily on the supply side. Now our focus also shifted to climate-friendly technology such as floating solar and hydrogen. This is also supported by efficiency improvement projects such as digitalization, energy efficiency generation, climate-friendly technologies to further reduce our carbon emission. On top of that, in Sarawak Energy, we have developed a high-level strategy for climate action, focusing on mitigation and adaptation. Sarawak Energy also embarked into voluntary climate-related financial disclosure guided by TCFD for better assessment of our operation data in managing our climate risk, which will be used to measure and evaluate the risks pertaining to our operation, projects, and basically throughout our supply chain, where we can improve how much it costs in terms of mitigating climate change in the future, what's the risk for transition risk and long-term risk, and so on. And all these are aligned with building a momentum around shifting to decarbonize the economy. So basically, it's contribute to global sustainability agenda and as well as the Paris Agreement. As we progress to our ambition, we are aligned to UN SDG, as I mentioned earlier. Our focus is basically on 6 goals, including climate action. So basically, sustainability underpin the way we do business in Sarawak Energy. We're also actively pursuing in commercialization of low carbon solution and promoting of a low carbon economy. We built Southeast Asia first integrated hydrogen production plant and refueling station. We will be building a large floating solar in one of our existing hydropower reservoir. We introduce renewable energy certificates so that sustainable companies can share their commitment toward renewable energy. To reaffirm this, as Dato mentioned, that we pledged to business ambition 1.5 degrees C last year. So we are the first corporate in Malaysia to do so. So that's really demonstrate our commitment. And now we are preparing all the targets so that we can validate it and disclose it. So we have another about 18 months to go for us to declare our targets. With renewable energy as the foundation, our business model support this ambition toward below 1.5 degrees C and zero emission by 2050. We will continue to provide renewable energy solution for Sarawak and beyond in building a sustainable future for all in the race to zero. Dato'. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Irwan. So we now go on to the pharmaceutical side. We've got Dr. Jason Snape from AstraZeneca. He's actually the global head of their environmental protection. And I guess it'll be interesting to see it from a slightly different perspective around what you've committed to do as a global firm. So over to you, Dr. Jason.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be with you, albeit virtually. And I'm extremely proud to give a short overview of how AstraZeneca is leading our industry with our Ambition Zero Carbon programme, a commitment that means that we are one of the most climate progressive companies worldwide in the race to zero. In AstraZeneca, we all live and breathe our values. When we follow the science and when we do the right thing, we don't just do that with a patient-centric mindset. We follow the science of environmental protection, whether it's the science of climate change or how we manage the discharges from our production sites into rivers and lakes. From a climate perspective, we can all see the warning signs for our society and the global economy. The highest global temperatures on record all fall in the last 2 decades. We're seeing increased incidences of air pollution, loss of biodiversity, extreme weather events and forest fires, and predictions that extreme heat coupled with high humidity will make some regions of the world inhospitable within decades. These impacts on climate change on planetary health are undoing many of the health benefits that we've delivered to society over the last 50 years, and they're going to impact the resilience of healthcare systems and our economy. Our commercial world is also changing. We're seeing environmental issues becoming financially and reputationally more material. We're seeing the seeds of green substitution for some medicinal products in some markets. And that's a trend that's only going to increase as we transition to a low carbon economy. In a moment, I'm going to talk about the Ambition Zero Carbon leadership we're giving, but it's important to emphasize that our leadership on climate isn't new. In 2015, when we launched our bold ambition to double our business, we were delivering this growth with a reduction in energy and natural resource consumption. We were decoupling business growth from carbon and energy consumption. In 2016, our greenhouse gas targets were approved by the Science Based Targets Initiative. Initially, these were aligned to limit global warming to 2 degrees C, and we were one of the first FTSE 350 companies to have our targets independently verified. We also signed on to the Climate Group's RE100 commitment in 2016 with an ambition to be RE100 in Europe and North America by 2020 and the rest of the world by 2025. In 2019, the Science Based Targets Initiative confirmed that our revised climate targets for Scope 1 and Scope 2 were aligned with the more progressive target to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C. And we also signed on to the Climate Group's EV100 commitment with an initial target to migrate our field force to 100% electric vehicles by 2030. And we're only one of 3 companies worldwide to be CDP AA rated for climate and water for 5 years in a row. So our leadership isn't new on climate. But last year at the World Economic Forum in January, we launched Ambition Zero Carbon as our flagship commitment to protect the planet and our health for today and tomorrow. We accelerated our commitments by having that commitment to be zero carbon emissions from our own operations, so Scope 1 and Scope 2, across our global operations by 2025, and then to ensure our entire value chain was carbon negative, so our Scope 3 emissions, by 2030. That brought forward our existing decarbonisation plans by more than a decade, and by 2025 it means we will have doubled our energy productivity, transition to 100% renewable energy for power and heat, switch to a fully electric vehicle fleet, so that's 17,000 vehicles globally, eliminated F-gas emissions from our sites where we make our respiratory medicines, and we will have launched next generation asthma and COPD medicines that have a near zero global warming potential. And to deliver on our climate ambitions, we follow the greenhouse gas hierarchy. We're in an innovation-based pharmaceutical company, so we first we design out our carbon footprint. We reduce our travel wherever we can. Then we look to reduce, so we're investing in energy efficiencies, and we've invested over 100 million in the last 5 years that have reduced our greenhouse gas footprint by about a third. Then we're going to look to substitute, so that's looking at renewable sources of energy wherever possible and transitioning to electric vehicle fleet. And where we cannot avoid, reduce and substitute, it's then and only then we will look to compensate using carbon capture and storage or even nature-based solutions. So following that hierarchy ensures we're credible in what we're doing and is consistent with our values to follow the science. And since 2015, we've reduced our Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas footprint by 60% while our business has grown. So you can grow without depleting natural resources. We've already transitioned to 100% renewable power globally. That's 5 years ahead of our initial commitments to do it by 2025. But it's not stopped there. We're going to increase the additionality of our renewable power through more on-site renewables and power purchase agreements. And out to 2025, we've got to focus on that transition to clean heat and electric vehicles. And the only way in which we can do this is through strong leadership and strong vision. And we have this ownership and we have this accountability from our CEO, but also the chairman of our board and the whole of our senior executive team. And that ownership on our wider sustainability agenda, as well as Ambition Zero Carbon, is both critical, but it's also genuine. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Jason. And that was, well, if you don't mind me saying so, it's a very scientific approach to the problem. And we'll come back to that if we have time. The last speaker is Mr. Andreas from Siemens. He's the MD of Siemens Malaysia. So what's your take on this issue?
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. Let me take a different angle and just to complement what the earlier speaker said. Today, we have about 30 gigatons of global CO2 emissions every year. That's 30 billion tons of CO2 every year. And within that, the power sector is the largest emitter these days, with around about 14 gigatons. And the next one is then transport with about 8 gigatons. So you can see climate change can only be tackled if the power sector, if the use of electricity and the generation of electricity changes. Now, we live all in a digital world. We are surrounded by mobiles. We are talking about electric vehicles and so on. So the electricity consumption will even increase coming out through the further years. And all industry production is practically based on all 24/7 available electricity. So how can we tackle the topic on the root cause? How can we do that? Now, I have the pleasure to work for Siemens and Siemens Energy, the specific company working on the energy side for that. To give you a rough overview of about 90,000 employees and 30 billion turnover, but I think more interesting for you is about every fifth power station worldwide at least runs on Siemens technology. And that is important, because it gives us the opportunity, as we are deep in the technology space, to make a change. Now, why is that necessary? And it's for a simple reason: because the consumers demand it, because the investors demand it, and because the company demands it, and the employees demand it. And very simple, it's like, imagine you're building a house for your family. What do you want this house to be? This house should be resilient and it should be sustainable. You don't want that you build a house and you said, well, I did it, great, it's cheap. Then comes the first storm and your house is gone. You want to build a house that also your kids and ideally your grandchildren can live in and use. And it's exactly the same view if you want to do your investments. Investments you want to do in something where you know this is also good for the long term. And this then comes down to technology. So as a technology company, we took a very conscious decision to step out of coal. Last year, 2020, Siemens Energy decided we will not do any longer new coal power plant projects worldwide. And that has definitely an impact, because we are not the only company alone who has announced that. And you see a change in the market. And there's also a rationale for that, because we don't recommend continuing building coal-fired power stations, because these assets that should operate maybe for 40 years also could become stranded assets. So from a pure investment point of view to our clients, it's not something we currently recommend. And let me give you an example why. It's estimated that between now and 2025, photovoltaics will undercut coal-fired power in China, in the US, and in other major regions. So from a purely economic choice, coal is not a preferred option anymore. Renewables are already today in many areas, and definitely in the future, is the lowest cost of electricity. So by a pure economic decision, renewables are first choice. The challenge in reality is that we all know the sun doesn't shine 24/7, nor does the wind blow in windy regions 24/7. So from a technical perspective, how to match a demand that needs to be met with a supply that is fluctuating. And that's exactly where we play our technology. It's either with high efficient gas plants, where we were able to increase the efficiency over 10% over the last 10 years, and reduce the fuel consumption by 20%. Or we are also leading currently the pack in terms of hydrogen generation, combining it with renewables to provide long-term solutions for storage. And there's probably not a sector as interesting as right now as the energy sector in terms of a transformation into more decarbonized areas. Decarbonization for us has become a key priority. And it's both from a technological standpoint, from a behavioral standpoint, the employees, and also putting, of course, ESG as the top of the priority. Ultimately, also, we will become a net zero company. And of course, all the things that have been measured by the other speakers, like have a net zero fleet, car fleet, using hydrogen in the future, and all that has already been implemented. In general, and maybe this is just a conclusion, the drive for a net zero is already there for purely economic reasons, and not only by just a government's perspective. But of course, it helps if the regulations support that. And just to give you one example, how dramatic this change in a positive way can be, Asia Pacific will see investments of $15 trillion up to 2050 in the power sector. Sorry, it will be, yes, and it's by the largest amount of investments globally will go into Asia. It's about 50% of the global investments. And just to give you one example, how fast the change has been in the last years. Vietnam has gone from nearly no renewable power, if we exclude now hydro just for a moment, I know that hydro is also renewable, up to round about 16 gigawatt as of today. And it's estimated by the end of this calendar, there will be 21 gigawatt of photovoltaics and wind capacity in Vietnam, which means within 2 years, Vietnam has added 30% of its whole power generation only in these two areas of renewable. That, of course, implies also dramatic change for all the energy technology, the transmission and the storage. And to say it's very exciting, I'm happy that we are working in this field and can make a significant contribution to hopefully a net zero company, and of course, getting the reduction targets of CO2 accomplished.
Thank you, Andres. That's very good. I'm just curious. You mentioned a number of 30 billion tons, but in Bill Gates' book, he talks about 51 billion. Has anyone ever been able to reconcile that?
Yeah, it's to be honest, probably different sources have different numbers. Yeah. The numbers we rely on are currently 30 gigatons. At the end of the day, I think what is important is the percentage in the reduction. That is very, very important. It's estimated that the power sector, which is around about 14 gigatons of emissions per year, can go down to 8 gigatons in 2050. So that would be a fantastic reduction And we think it's possible because technology already supports that.
Okay, excellent. So we don't have that many. Well, we have one question and not much time, but the one question that was posted on Slido was addressed to you, Andrew. So what are the challenges you're facing on sustainability investment into natural capital projects like forestry, mangoes, and so on? And what kind of returns or investments are clients accepting? So I guess, Andrew, this goes to the point where you mentioned about the 1 trillion and how you will help companies deal even with the transition. But what has HSBC's experience been in terms of these natural capital projects? I mean, do you support them? And if you do, what kind of expectations do you put on them?
I mean, we do support them, but obviously, we're very, very selective, and we have to be absolutely certain that these sort of projects are run in a sustainable manner and fit within the guidelines that we strictly enforce internally. I mean, I think in terms of returns, that's probably quite a difficult question to answer without giving away
that's fair enough.
But no, I think the world is a changing place, and I mean, obviously, there's been some sectors which have been really sort of frowned upon by the banking sector, by the financial services sector as a whole. But when it comes to properly thought through sustainable projects, then the banks are definitely open to that sort of business. But it's clear that in the past, where rainforests have been cleared without any thought or consideration, and we all know what sort of industries have been doing that in the past. It's important that we move forward and we support projects that are sustainably set up and hit all the important points that we've been talking about this afternoon.
Okay. Well, as I say, we don't have much time, but I thought maybe a question generally to all of you, and see where we go in this. So I'm reflecting back on Farouz's comment about his 4 little things you should be doing, and I think item 3 was about building it into your strategy. But listening to Dr. Jason, it occurred to me that obviously being able to measure your own emission, whichever definition you use, is probably quite an important one. So I'm just wondering, this is a question to the panel. I mean, how difficult was it to get to your scope 3s, if indeed you have already, or even doing the first 2, scope 1 and 2? I mean, and this is more about sharing the challenges for those people on the call, meaning that when you embark upon this, you have to measure it. And maybe I could start with Dr. Jason. I mean, how did AstraZeneca go about addressing that quantification?
I think for our own assets, so for scope 1 and scope 2, that data is quite easy to come by. So we have the metering, we have the bills that will come. So we can look at the consumption, track that consumption. We don't just do it on a site and an asset basis. Actually, we also do it on our products. And that's our products within our own operations, but also our products across the whole of our value chain. So we will take the life cycle assessment of our medicinal product. We will know where the carbon footprint actually sits within what processes, and where actually that sits within the broader value chain as well. If we're looking at the scope 3 for business travel, we have good primary data. For freight and logistics, again, good primary data.
Sure.
I think where our greatest uncertainty is with the purchased goods and services. And obviously a lot of that carbon footprint is predicted on dollar spend. So a lot of the effort that we've got at the moment is trying to understand or get better access to primary data. But we also have to recognize, as an innovation-based pharmaceutical company, a lot of the purchased goods that we have and services at the moment are unlikely to be the same ones that we're going to have in 10 years' time. So our portfolio is changing. So we're designing sustainability into our new molecules, but also into our new supplier networks as well. So for us, it's not a static beast. It's something that's very, very dynamic and changing. And for many of our products, heat and power isn't the challenge. It's actually the solvents that we use to make our medicines. And it's looking at embracing the circular economy. So heat and power is one solution, the same as the F-gases in our electric vehicle fleet. But it's how we design our molecules and how we treat our wastes and embrace circularity that's going to be critical out to 2030 and beyond.
Okay. Actually, there's one other question that just got popped up. Well, sorry, another one. So obviously, everyone suddenly decided to ask questions. So, Andres, this I think is a really what I would describe it as being an insider question, which I don't really quite understand. So I'll just read it out to you. Andreas, the Powering Past Coal Alliance has failed to address the retrofitting necessary here, and now to minimize greenhouse gas emissions in existing CFPPs. Can you comment? So has the Powering Past Coal Alliance really failed?
Yeah, it's a very good question because I mean in infrastructure business, the infrastructure is built and think also about the road networks for a long term perspective. And similar, it's of course in the power industry, the transmission networks, all the power stations and so on. Typically, they have a lifetime of 40 years or even longer. So it's a long term view. Now, anyone, of course, currently having such an asset thinks of how can the asset be optimized, and how can, for example, the carbon emissions be reduced, and that is very important. So it's not always, of course, the step to, or maybe with a photovoltaics immediately, but it's also how can the existing, the assets be optimized in terms of the carbon emissions. And that has become very, very important, and it includes digital technology use, of course, different mechanical optimizations. So that is also an aspect, because only with that, of course, the overall reduction can also be achieved. Now, looking into that, of course, we cannot also not neglect that coal-fired power stations, especially here in Asia, are still the backbone, of the electricity supply. So it's impossible to switch them off from one day to another one. But important is that technology advancements are being brought in, the emissions are being reduced, and gradually there's a continuous decarbonization in that area. Not sure if I exactly answered your question, but at least wanted to give some direction into that.
Fair enough. Everyone, there's a question for you here. So Sarawak Energy is operating a few major dams, but you're also clearing tropical forests, i.e. carbon sinks, to build them. How do you balance the two?
Yeah. Basically, if you look at about hydropower, regardless whether it's big or small, it's all about whether it's being developed in a sustainable manner, right? Some small projects, if it's not being developed in a sustainable manner, the impact will be similar, right? So for us, we are adopting the HACCP assessment protocol in the way we develop our hydro projects. Under this tool, we need to estimate what's the GHG emission from the reservoir. So if you look at the horizon of our hydropower plant projects, it can stretch up to 100 years as compared to thermal power plant. And we talk about coal-fired, right? 40 years or 30 years, or gas-fired, something like that. But if you look at the whole horizon of 100 years, there's a model called GRES2. When we plug in the figures, when we calculate it, so it's able to determine whether these projects align with low carbon emission, right? So there is a calculation to it. For example, more than 5 watt per meter square, in terms of we need to inundate less area and maximize the power generation of it. So there is a technique to it. Yeah, there is a measurement to it. So we are doing that for all our hydropower plant. So that we already send it for validation. So where are we at this moment? And of course, when we look at this, then we can able to determine emission per kilowatt hour generated from our power plant, hydropower plant. That's it, yeah.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, we're out of time and out of questions, so I'm going to draw it to a close now. So thank you very much for sharing your organization's viewpoint on this particular topic. And we look forward to the fact that all of you will one day achieve net zero. So with that, I'll hand you back to the moderator. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Faiz. What an interesting session it was. It's interesting to hear how organizations from different sectors are taking action against climate change. So we do look forward to the successful achievement of net zero in the future. So thank you, Dr. Faiz, again, and to all our speakers for the session, Andrew, Encik Irwan, Jason, and Andreas. Thank you very much. So ladies and gentlemen, with that, we are coming to near end of our webinar for today. But before we end our webinar, there is some poll questions that are live on Slido. You may want to answer them. Hi again. The questions are still live on Slido. So for the poll, if you're still interested, please continue to access the Slido and answer those questions. But meanwhile, allow me to take this opportunity to share with you our next upcoming webinar, our final installment of the BMCC British High Commission Great for a Sustainable Future campaign March webinar series. So this one was happening on 31st of March. We will be hosting the webinar on the theme UK Green Investment Landscape Outlook for Investors, where we will have the Lord Mayor of the City of London, Alderman William Russell, as our special guest speaker, as well as speakers from the London Stock Exchange and the Department for International Trade, UK. Please do join us. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our webinar for this afternoon. Thank you very much once again to all our speakers, moderators for being with us today. Thank you also to our supporting organizations. We had many of them saying okay to promote the webinar, seeing the importance of this session, and also to all the team members from both from the BMCC and the British High Commission for working behind the scenes to bring this webinar for success for today. So I hope that the webinar has broadened all our perspectives on the race to zero and continue to support the agenda to continue. So on behalf of the BMCC and the British High Commission, thank you everyone for joining us. We look forward to having you again in our webinar series, and I hope you found the sessions valuable. So with that, take care and stay safe. Bye for now.